SharePoint Online is the leader in content services platforms where users access data and collaborate on documents. There are over 200 million SharePoint users, and that number continues to grow. More than 400,000 organizations use SharePoint, which makes SharePoint customization a powerful skill to put in your toolkit, on your resume, and in your LinkedIn profile. This is not an introduction to SharePoint Online, so if you're new to SharePoint, I would encourage you to begin with the SharePoint Online Essential Training, the Basics course, then come back here. But if you are a SharePoint power user, site owner, or you want to prepare for those roles, I invite you to join me for this exploration under the hood of SharePoint Online. There are a few things that you will need if you wish to work along with me in this course. First, obviously, you'll need to have SharePoint Online, which is part of Microsoft 365. You'll need to have adequate permissions. You need to have the ability to modify a site. You'll need to be the site owner, and if you want to learn about hub sites, you'll need to be the site collection administrator. This is a site that you should be able to modify without annoying other users, not a production site. So ask your SharePoint administrator or your IT department to provide you with a site to test things out in. And if that's not possible, you can sign up for a free 30-day trial of Microsoft 365, which includes SharePoint. Search for Microsoft 365 trial for more information. We access SharePoint Online with the browser, and not all browsers are created to work with SharePoint, so let's look at the browsers that are. If you are using Windows 10, you can use Microsoft Edge or Edge Chromium, Internet Explorer 11, or the latest versions of Firefox or Chrome. If you're using older versions of Windows, like Windows 8, 8.1, or Windows 7 with Service Pack 1, you can use Internet Explorer 11, and again, latest versions of Firefox or Chrome. If your organization is still running Windows Vista, you have to have at least Service Pack 2, but you can use Firefox or Chrome with SharePoint Online. If you're a Mac user using Mac OS X 10.8 or later, you can use Safari or you can use Google Chrome. If you're a Linux user, use the latest versions of Firefox or Chrome for the best experience with SharePoint Online. What if you use a combination of an operating system and a browser that I haven't shown you here? Well, some of the things I demonstrate may not work for you in the same way. We'll also be working with SharePoint mobile apps a bit in this course. So if you're an iPhone user using at least iOS 10.0, use the SharePoint for iPhone app. If you're an iPad user using at least iOS 10.0, then download the SharePoint app for iPad. Both of these apps are available in the Apple App Store. If you're using an older iOS, then Safari is the best browser for SharePoint and also for Office on the web, on iPhones and iPads. But some of the features that I show you may not be available if you're using Safari. If you're using an Android device, then simply use the SharePoint app for Android, which you can download from Google Play. So get your devices and your browsers in order, and I'll see you in the next movie. While SharePoint Online has been around for a while, there was a major overhaul of SharePoint done a few years ago, and the result is what is called the modern SharePoint experience, or the modern experience. In the modern experience, there are three core types of SharePoint sites: team sites, communication sites, and hub sites. Team sites are sites that are meant for collaboration. Whenever you create a team site, SharePoint automatically creates a related Microsoft 365 groups. And your site will be equipped with apps like a document library, a calendar, an activity list. Communication sites are not meant for collaboration, so when you create a communication site, you don't automatically generate a Microsoft 365 group. Communication sites are meant for sharing information from a subgroup to a much larger group. For example, from your sales team to your entire organization. Both team sites and communication sites are created from SharePoint Home. Right here, by clicking Create Site, you'll be given an opportunity to create either a team site or a communication site from here. Here's an example of a team site. We have navigation on the left. We have news at the top. some activities, some documents. This one actually has a weather app. And we're featuring one particular document here at the top, a PowerPoint presentation. If I look at a communication site, it's a very different look, although still part of the modern SharePoint experience. In a communication site, I have an image-rich homepage. And while it has some of the same apps like documents, pages, and so on, this is typically for supporting the imagery or the text in this published site. So if I click on Learn About Wind Power Worldwide, I'll end up on a page from the pages here at the top. When I create a new communication site or a new team site in the modern SharePoint experience, I create an entire site collection. Hub sites are the glue used to organize SharePoint Online. Hub sites organize sites by connecting them to each other. You associate a site to a hub site. Sites that are associated with a hub inherit common branding and navigation from the hub site. And we can easily display news and activities from associated sites in a hub site. Hub sites also assist with search. If you have, for example, a sales hub with associated team sites for sales groups, if you search the sales hub, SharePoint says, I need to search this hub site and all of the associated sites. Hub sites have to be created by SharePoint administrators. They require this high level of permission because they are critical components for the SharePoint infrastructure and organization for your company. This site is actually a hub site. There's an icon up here in the upper left-hand corner. That icon may differ, but note that between my banner and the top of this site, I have one more extra space that's really for the hub, and I can add links here then to associated sites if I wish. And then finally, there is a fourth type of site. It's a legacy site, and these are team sites that were created with the built-in SharePoint Online templates that were used in the past. If your organization has used SharePoint Online for a while, you probably have some legacy sites kicking around in your SharePoint collection. However, these sites will look a lot like the modern sites because their document libraries and their lists have all been updated to match the document libraries and lists in the modern SharePoint experience. But in this course, we're going to focus on the sites that you can create with SharePoint Online today, with all the features in the modern experience. We'll spend our time working with team sites, communication sites, and associating the sites we create with hub sites. To create a new site, all I need to do is go to SharePoint Home, click Create Site, and then choose between a team site and a communication site. We're going to quickly create one of each. Let's start with the team site. The purpose of this site is to create a collaboration space for the people who work on wind installations. So I'm going to call this Wind Installations. Note that SharePoint checks to see if the site name is available, and then it creates a group email address by stripping out the spaces. I don't need to. Now, if I wanted to have a smaller or a shorter email address here, I could. I can click the edit pencil, and I can just say Wind Installs, and it says that that is available. The site address, it says this site address is available with modifications if I want to change it, but I actually want the site address to say Wind Installations. But that's what it looks like when a site isn't available. This site address is available, and it gives us some ideas of how we could fix it. We're just going to say Wind Installations. Site description, tell people the purpose of the site. Collaboration space for installers of wind turbines, farms, and systems. And then I get to choose my privacy settings. The question is, do I want anyone to be able to be in this site? And if I did, I would make this public. But I've been asked to set up a site only for the wind installers, so we will leave this as private. We can change our minds about this later. Here's what you can't change your mind about, the language, and you're even warned about that. It says you can't change this later. So this isn't a good time to try to see what a site would look like if it was, for example, a site using traditional Chinese. When you've entered all of the information you wish, Click Next, and you're immediately prompted to be able to add other people, with a note that we can add people later. But it's a good practice to add an additional owner right now, because you might want to have a day that you're not available, so then someone else can answer questions or do administrative duties on this site. I'm going to add Reggie Tupp as an additional owner, and I'm going to add one member right now so you can see how that works. I'm going to add Robert Molina, who's a wind and solar technician, and I'm going to click Finish. Users were added, sites created. Here is our new wind installation site. Note that at the top, I'm automatically following this site because I created it. So if part of your duties include setting up sites for other users, it's a good practice simply to not follow them immediately, but I'm going to keep following this site for right now to make sure that I come back and add members later. We can tell that there are 3 members. If I click, I'll see who they are and what their roles are. I'm an owner, Reggie's an owner, Robert is a member. And this is how hard it is to add other members later on. Simply click the icon for members and add more people. Now I'd like to create another site for the wind installation team, and it's going to be a communication site so they can communicate with everyone in our organization about what it is they're doing with installations. Let's go back to SharePoint Home. Create site. Communication site. There are 2 different designs. Topic design is the design that you should use if you want to share a lot of different information about events, news, and so on. There's also a showcase, and this is really visually oriented. So if you want to show off the work of a team, or, for example, a new product line, and you have lots of images, this is what you would choose, showcase. Or the third possibility is you could start with a blank and add web parts to it. But we're going to start with a showcase because that's what we're creating, a place for the installs team to show off their work. We don't necessarily refer to those by their long name of showcase. We just call them shows. So this is going to be a wind show. Note that the site address is available and that this is going to be a showcase for the work of the wind team. Installers, sales, service. Select the language, click Finish. And we get a site that already has images to give you some idea of how you might want to work with the site. Note that we weren't prompted to add another owner. Always, in my opinion, a good idea. We weren't prompted to add members. The imagination behind the communication sites is that you're not adding other people immediately because you're probably going to work on the site, improve it, make it ready before you share it. But later on, when you wish, you can click Share, and you can then add site owners here, site members, and site visitors. Let's look first at the customization options that are available to both team sites and communication sites. I'm going to go to the site we just created. I can find it right here. Simply type in wind and click the arrow and I'll be taken to a search page. And this shows the 2 new sites we just created. So let's go to the team site. We're going to click the settings gear and drop down to change the look. We can change the look of 2 items here, the theme, which is the color scheme, and the header, which is this area here that has the title of the site in it. Let's start with the theme. The current selection here looks like it's gray. This was chosen for us. And I'm going to choose teal. And you don't see a big change because the SharePoint banner at the top isn't going to change. What's changed is the button and other items on the site. If I click Customize, you'll see that that teal is the main color and the secondary color is a purple, and I'd actually rather have the accent color be a gray. And I'm going to click Save. I'd also like to point out that if you want to change the colors in a more detailed way, one option is to drop back to the Change the Look options in Classic SharePoint if none of these meet your criteria. But with teal in place, I'm going to return to change the look, and if I want to see anything else reflected, I could refresh this page, but I've already saved those choices. We'll go into the header area. The first choice is how much space we want to have for the header. Currently, the layout is compact, and if I make it standard, then private group, which was previously at the right, has shifted over, and it's just a little bit more of a spacious look. I think the compact look is also just fine. I have a logo for my site. It's the same logo that the installs team uses. So I'm going to click change, and I've provided you with this logo as well. It's in the exercise files, and it's called Windmill Sprout. So you can use that if you'd like. Finally, I can change the background of the header itself so it stands out from the page a little more. Right now, it's the same color as the page. I could choose a gray, for example, this light blue, or the darker color in my color scheme. I'm going to just drop into the gray and click Save. If your changes don't automatically appear, simply refresh the page. If I wanted to see some of the changes I've applied, if I had applied any, I could now refresh my browser, but we're going to continue and make some additional changes. Returning to change the look then, let's open our header options. At the top we have 4 different layouts that are available for how our header looks. The default is standard. That's what's kicked on right now. And with standard, we have a fair amount of space at the top. Information about the group is listed at the left. Information about the number of members listed at the right. If I switch to minimal, you'll notice everything is adjusted to the left, and my header is much smaller than it was a moment ago. Compact sort of splits the difference between minimal and standard. My information about the group itself and members are on the right-hand side. It's a slightly smaller header than standard, but not a lot of space. But at the opposite end of the spectrum from minimal is extended. It gives us a really large header with some additional space we could use for header type tasks here. I'm going to maintain standard at this point, but this is so easy to change. You can modify it at any time in the future. I have 4 background choices, all of which are based on the theme. The default is to have a plain background and to use the primary theme color for our logo. The opposite looks like this. So I have now a dark green header, again based on the theme, and I have light text. Some less striking choices are a light color here, chosen again from the theme palette, or a gray, and I'm going to stick with that gray. A relatively new option for SharePoint Online is to set the visibility of the title in the header. If you don't want the title to show up, you can simply remove it. And if you were to do that, you might also want to swing to minimal, because you still get this small logo. So if the logo is sufficient, then you might choose not to have the title itself visible. Finally, I have 2 choices about what I do with my logo, and I want to look at the second option first, which is I can totally remove the logo, and if I do, it's gone. Or I can choose to add a logo, and I have given you the same logo file I'm going to use in the exercise files. It's called Windmill Sprout. It's a JPEG. And if you choose Windmill Sprout, then you have now a logo that is an image rather than having the initials of the site used as our logo. I can still remove the logo altogether if I wish at any point in time, and I can change to a different logo. The site logo thumbnail appears in places where the site is referred to, for example, in search results, in SharePoint Home. And I'd like you to note that while there's a change button, you can change the site logo thumbnail, there is not a remove button at this point. So if you want to get rid of the image that you have assigned to a site logo thumbnail, you end up having to choose a different image to replace it. I'm going to change to exactly the same thumbnail. And now this logo will appear not just here on my site, but it will also appear in search results. But if I ever want to replace it, I will actually have to change rather than remove that site logo thumbnail, even if I've already removed my site logo. Having made my changes to layout, background, and display, I am now ready to save my changes to the look of this site and close my settings. Now let's take a look at the options that are available in communication sites that are not available in a team site. And that option is to be able to display and modify the contents of a footer. We begin the same way we did when we were changing the look of the header and the theme, which is to start with settings and drop down to change the look. But because we are in a communication site, look, two more options, navigation and footer. Let's look at the footer first. The first choice is whether we want a footer at all, and the footer is enabled, so it is turned on. And then the question is, what type of a layout would you like to have? We have an option of simple and an option of extended. We can drop a logo into the footer if we wish, and we can add a display name to the footer so that we can see what these items look like. I'm going to add the same logo to the bottom, windmill sprout, and display name that I'm going to add is footer, just so we can see it, and click Save. If we now scroll down to our footer, at the bottom, we have the logo, the word footer, and edit. And if I click edit, I have the ability to add whatever items I would like in terms of links or labels to the footer. So if I wanted to have a label, for example, for contact information, I can do that here. Put a display name and so on. If I want to add links to other sites, then I enter addresses and display names. I'm going to return to change the look, and for now I'm going to turn off the footer. It's gone. There won't even be an edit link there, so I can edit it any longer. Most SharePoint sites use a type of navigation called cascading menus. But in communication sites and hub sites, you can use mega menus, a different way to create menus. I've already modified some of the terms that are on the menu, and I really want to show you how I did this. So if I edit the menu, I have a choice to add more items. So for example, if I wanted to add under pages, another item, and I will create a link eventually, but right now I'm simply going to create this as a label so that I can show this to you. And if we had year-to-date service report, I'll simply drop that in here. It comes in as a sublink, but if I wish, I can promote the sublink. I can also change the name of any of these. So I want to change documents, edit its name. This is the address for it. And rather than calling this documents, I'm going to call it news, because all of our news items are going to go here. And I'm going to change pages so that it is named internal, because this content shouldn't be shared. So with a combination of creating new items where I'd like to have them, perhaps promoting them to a sublink, editing them, I can remove them, move them up or down. I can also drag in here to move items up or down. I end up with a lot of navigation because I have a lot of places people can go in my site. All of this is so I can show you about two different methods of navigation. The primary method of navigation that's used in team sites, if you want to create a menu like this, is called cascading menus. So when I hover over or click on our work, I have the choice of news, and under news I have our work, media, our work and story, customer testimonials, and under internal I have sales FAQ and the two year-to-date report items. So as I work my way through the navigation, each time I make a choice, I have more choices that lead me down a path, but I don't see the other options. The alternative to this is something that's called mega menus, and I want to show you the difference. If we go to change the look, again in a communication site or in a hub, and click on navigation, and I change to mega menu, we're going to get a different experience that is going to allow our users of our site to see everything that's available to them rather than going down a narrow path to their particular goal. So note when I click now, I get all of the news and all of the internal, and all of it's available. So a user in cascading menus that might have worked their way to customer testimonials would never have seen the items under internal. Mega menus are very popular because you can expose a lot of information about what's in your site. They're made for this kind of a hierarchy where we have a top level like our work, a second level like news and internal, and a third level where we have the specific items that our users would want to navigate to. As you're imagining how you're going to configure the navigation for your communication site, then know that mega menus are an option as well as cascading menus, and that with a mega menu you really would have the option to put about 60 items well organized into this space for your users to select from. At our company, Kinetico, all of the installations belong under field services. Solar installations, wind installations, and so on. And field services has created a hub. The solar sites are already hooked up, as well as service to sales. But what I'd like to do is show you how we can connect wind installations to the hub. Now, you must be a SharePoint administrator to create a hub site like the field service hub. However, if you are the administrator for a site collection, and all modern SharePoint sites are technically site collections, then you usually have the ability to associate a SharePoint site with a hub site that already exists. And often when the SharePoint administrator creates a new hub site, they set up a group of people who can associate other sites with that hub. So in some organizations, site owners have this permission because the administrator was smart and it helps them share out the administrative work. Assuming that you either have permission to associate sites with hubs, or you might have that permission someday, let me show you how to do this. You go to the site you wish to associate, in this case, wind installations. Click the settings gear and choose site information. And if you have permission to associate this with a hub, then you'll see hub site association and you'll be able to click this drop down and choose from the hub sites in your organization. In this case, we have only one, field service. Now note that after you make a selection, there's a comment added below this drop down that says, when you connect your site to this hub, your site will inherit both the theme and the navigation from the hub site. In other words, the work that we did earlier to change the look of this site will basically be overwritten by some of the theming elements from field service. If we're happy with that, because it's a good trade-off for us, if people search in field service, they'll get results that come from our site. I'm going to simply click Save. I can tell that my site is now connected to a sub-site because A, we have the hub site logo here in the upper left-hand corner. I have the navigation from the hub site. So I'll immediately talk to the administrator for the hub site and say, hey, could you please add wind installations to the navigation here on the field service hub site? And our formerly gray button from the theme that we had applied is now green because that's the primary color in the theme from field service. From this point forward, I'm not going to engage in branding my site, changing its look and so on, because when we connect to the hub, we are now inheriting our navigation and we're inheriting our theme. One more thought. If you've worked in the past with classic SharePoint Online, you might be used to sites and subsites, and then when you have a subsite and you usually inherit permissions. There's no permission inheritance here at all. All we're inheriting from the hub site is the navigation and the branding. Now, if in the future, for some reason, I decide that this site should no longer be associated with the field service hub site, I can return to the settings to site information and I can disassociate it. However, the theming of the site that was applied by field service will still be here. So at that point, I would have the choice to apply a different theme. This is the first of several movies on different ways that we can create and customize lists in Microsoft SharePoint Online. The list feature has really been expanded in the last year. Microsoft announced Microsoft lists, which were built from SharePoint lists, but can also be used in other applications like Teams. And there are templates available to make it easy to create and customize lists that just look beautiful. To create a new list in your site, you simply click the New button, and at the top, you choose List. And you have choices. You can make a blank list. You can make a list from Excel. We'll be doing that later. You can make a list from an existing list. But then there are templates. At this point, there are 8 commonly used templates, but I expect to see a number more here. And you decide whether one of these might meet your needs. I actually want to create an issue tracker. But even though there's a classic SharePoint app for issues, it doesn't look anything like this. This is sample data. What you want to pay attention to when you're choosing is what the columns of data are. Do they broadly meet your needs? Issue description, priority status, who it's assigned to, associated files, who logged it. This is really very close to what I want, maybe exactly what I want. So I'm going to click Use Template to create this list. And I'm simply going to change its name slightly so it's Installation Issue Tracker. What is your list about? This is a tracking app for installation issues. I'm asked whether I want it to show in site navigation, in other words, add it here to the left, and I do. And now I will click Create to create this new list. The list is going to load on its own page, and everything you already know about how to use a list in SharePoint works here as well. I'm going to create a new item. So I click the New button, and a new item form opens. Enter the value here. Cement not curing properly. Issue description. Cement not curing due to low temperatures. What's the priority? There are 4 choices. This is critical. It will hold the entire project up. Status of the issue. We have a number of choices here, and this is actually new, and that's the default. Assigned to Rob Molina. Date reported. I can simply click the one that's in the box. I can either enter the URL of where this issue was originally logged, or I can say that this is observed at customer site. If I have images, I can add them. I'm the person who logged this. I can find myself here. I can add any attachments I wish and save it. And this is just a beautiful list, easy to work with. I can customize this list later if I wish. There's a place here to add more columns, and I can modify it. And I'll show you later how to customize the columns that appear in a list. But this gives us a beautiful application really quickly that we can use immediately. In addition to the Microsoft list, there are built-in list apps available that you can also add to your site. So if Microsoft lists don't have a list for the application you have in mind, we have other options. The second option is to add an app to the site. So I can choose Settings, add an app. I can also click New, App. Both of those are the same. And these are the apps that are available for us to add. In this case, what I would like to add is I'd like to add a list of contacts. And the contacts list will be used for subcontractors who work with us. If I click App Details, I'll get more information about this Contacts app. It says a list of people your team works with, like customers or partners. Contact list can synchronize with Microsoft Outlook or other compatible programs. This contacts list and the calendar app share that feature. Then rather than ask all of your team members to maintain separate contacts for people, we can have a centralized list that they can synchronize with Outlook. I'm going to click Add It to add this app. Pick a name for it. Subcontractors is my choice. If I click Advanced Options, it's actually going to wipe that out of the way. But I can pick it up back up right here by hitting the Tab key. And these are approved bonded subcontractors. Only contractors on this list can be used. Click Create. And here's my list where I can add subcontractors. Now, these columns are columns that can also be supported in Microsoft Outlook. They look familiar to you probably. I can have an attachment. I can customize this to add or remove different columns. Again, we'll talk more about that in a bit. If I want to edit this or my last list in grid view, I can click and I'll be taken into a view that works really like Microsoft Excel so that I can tab from column to column to add items. If I prefer to use a form, I can do that. If I click the new button, it will open a form. And this form, by the way, is customizable using Microsoft PowerApps. So here are all of the columns of data that are being collected. And in a matter of minutes, I have a new application that can be synchronized with Microsoft Outlook. This isn't the only list app that is available. So as with the templates, before you build something from scratch, you should take a look at the different lists that are here for you. A tasks list, a links list, announcements, contacts, which we just created, calendar, a promoted links list, which creates a tile for each of the links, a discussion board, tasks, issue tracking, some custom lists, a survey, and then import spreadsheet. And so always before you add a list application, take a look through the Microsoft list templates and also take a look at the built-in SharePoint apps. My favorite SharePoint list is a list that already exists, that I don't need to retype, I don't need to copy and paste, that I can simply pull from elsewhere. And because there are so many Excel users in the business world, that elsewhere is often Microsoft Excel. We can take a table from Excel like this and push it into SharePoint as a custom list. If you'd like to work along with me, you'll find this workbook in the exercise files. To make this process easy, your Excel data should already be formatted as a table, and this is. I know that because if I select a cell in the table, I get a Table Design tab right here. And this Table Design tab has an export command, Export Table to SharePoint List. That's exactly what we're going to do. I'm asked first where I want to publish my table. Now, if you've done a lot of publishing in this way from Excel, you may have some choices here. If not, don't worry. The easiest thing to do is for us to go directly to our site and simply select the URL. Now, you can hold Control and hit A for all, and then C for copy. And with our URL now on the clipboard, come on back to Excel and Control V to paste. Our next choice is decide whether or not to create a read-only connection to this new SharePoint list that we'll be creating. If this workbook is connected to the SharePoint list, my existing table will be replaced with a query, same formatting and everything, and future editing will be done in SharePoint, but each time I open this, if I refresh my table, I'll get the latest data from SharePoint. This is a great strategy for workbooks where you want users to be able to enter information, but you'd still like to do some analysis in Excel. Rather than placing the workbook itself in SharePoint for people to edit in it, I can create this list app. I have control over permissions on the list app, and I still have access to my data, can add other columns to the right for analysis and so on. I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to create a read-only connection so that as the inventory is updated, I will get updates back here in Excel. Now I need to provide a name. This is Western Inventory, and the description is Inventory of Parts and Products, Western Region. Click Next. Excel and SharePoint have slightly different data types. Excel has data types like number, date, text, whereas SharePoint has an expansive list including a single line of text, number, currency, and so on. So in this step, step 2, we are verifying that the columns that we've created and the data types are correct. That category is a single line of text, name a single line of text, package quantity is a number. You want to make sure that these are correct. This was Excel's analysis based on the contents of the rows of data. So one way this trips up is if in column C, which is a number, some people have typed in a value like NA or missing or some text. And you'll want to fix this here. If you own the workbook, then you just change it. If you don't, you could use the Microsoft Query Editor to be able to query and clean the data on the way, although that's beyond the scope of this course. What I'll tell you is that if it's wrong leaving Excel, you can't make it right in SharePoint. So make sure that each of these is correct, that if it's supposed to be a number or currency or a date, that is accurately reflected here. When you're content with what you have, click Finish. I click this link, and it will take me to my list in SharePoint. Right here. It's a nice looking list. All of my data. This is a very easy way to take a shared spreadsheet and make it available to a group or to your entire organization. One more thought about this process. There is more than one way to get Excel data into a new app in SharePoint. From SharePoint, you could actually choose Add an App, and on the app list, there is an Import Spreadsheet app. This app is actually created to duplicate columns of data of an existing spreadsheet from, for example, Microsoft Excel. However, I export Excel data into SharePoint exactly the way I just showed you, from Excel, rather than using this Import Spreadsheet app, because the Excel export is very flexible, and this app does not allow me to create that dynamic connection between the SharePoint list I create and the original table in Microsoft Excel. I just created a new custom list, and I'd like users to be able to find it. There are a couple of strategies for this. One possibility is to add it to the navigation here on the left. That's called the Quick Launch. And that's a setting for the app itself. If I click the Settings button and we go to List Settings, and in the left column under General Settings, List Name, Description, and Navigation, this is where you could change its name and description. But there's a simple question. Do I want to display this list on the Quick Launch? And if I say yes and save, then the list name that I provided will be added to the navigation in the Quick Launch. I had to refresh to see it, but there it is. Now, our option was not add to navigation. It was very specific, add to Quick Launch. And there are some sites that are designed with navigation that does not utilize Quick Launch. For example, we might have navigation directly below the header. And in that case, there will be an edit button that will allow you to add a particular app or the page for an app like Western Inventory. So let me show you how that might happen. Let's return first and remove this from the Quick Launch. Changing the list settings, navigation settings, don't put it on the Quick Launch, and choose Save. And if I refresh, it will disappear from the Quick Launch. But the Quick Launch itself can be edited like other navigation can be edited. So if I wanted to add this particular app, this list, to my navigation, I would make sure that I've copied the URL for it. Whatever navigation was available, I would choose to edit. And you will have the ability to add an item. So, for example, I might want this below notebook. And I'm going to choose link, paste in the link that I just copied, and then add a display name. Western Inventory. Click OK. And the Quick Launch behaves like every other navigation menu you would work with. So whether you have a Quick Launch or another type of navigation, you now know how to edit either the app settings or the navigation settings. When you're done, click Save to apply the changes you just made. Previously, we created a subcontractors list app, and I've filled in some data so we would have something to look at in terms of customization. So if you want to add 2 or 3 of your friends, their last names, first names, company, business phone, and email address. You can do that, or you can watch for now and do that later. Note that I can adjust the widths of these columns, but there tends to be a minimum width that it won't let me get past. Let's begin by describing the difference between what's actually in this list and what we're seeing. This is a view of this list. It has attachments, last name, first name, company, business phone, home phone, email address, and then the ability to add a column. But before we add columns, I want you to see what actually exists in this list in terms of columns. I'm going to click the settings button, and we're going to go to the list settings, because these are the columns that are already in this list. Remember that we chose an application that could synchronize with Outlook, and Outlook tracks a lot more than those few columns of information. Additionally, anytime a record is created or saved in SharePoint wants to know when it was last modified or created, and it has columns for who did those things. So those 4 columns are going to exist virtually everywhere that you have data stored in a list or in a library. But Outlook has something called a last name phonetic, a first name phonetic. Then we have full name, which we're not seeing in our view. Our view actually only includes last name, first name, email address, company, business phone, and home phone. All of these other fields are available to us to show in the view, and that's an option. The reason you need to know this is you don't need to create these columns. They already exist. They're already part of this app. So if we go back to our app, you might wonder, if I wanted a column that's not here at all, how would I create it? Let's do that first. I can add a column, and my choices are first to show or hide a column that's already there. So this is how I add an existing column like you just saw to the view. If I want to see that list of columns, I can click here and say, oh, I'd actually feel a lot better if I showed job title or something. That's how you add a column to the view. But if the column's not on that list that we want, then you can choose to add a particular column. These are the types of columns that are available in SharePoint Online. A single line of text is really the default for text. Multiple lines of text, location, number, yes, no, or Boolean. It can store a 0 or 1 or yes or no. A person, and this is a person or group in your organization's Active Directory. Date and time, and that's actually what I'm going to add. Choice, where you provide a list of choices. For example, I might have a column for department, and then I might have a list of the department names that someone could choose from. I could say hyperlinks will be stored in this column. For example, mail to hyperlinks for email. Currency, an image, and yes, there are more. The type I want to add, however, is date and time, so I'm going to snag this right here. And each time you add a column, you'll be asked a couple of standard things, and then there'll be other options based on the data type that you selected just now. The Create a Column pane flies in, and the column that I'm going to create is bond date. And this is date on latest bond, because our subcontractors need to be bonded and they need to provide proof of their bond. I should actually use that language. Date on latest proof of bond. And my types, note I chose date and time and it brought it in here for me. Now I can choose, do I want to include time, yes or no? And I can choose a friendly format or not. And I can choose a default value. So if you're creating a list where one of the columns is when did you add this data, then today's date would be a good default. Or you can set a particular date and time. But unless you have a good value that you will rarely need to change, you should not include a default value, because that will then force people to actually enter a value. You have some additional options here. Is this a required column? Right now, we could enter a subcontractor and not know their latest bond date, and that would be allowed. If I set this to yes, you can't save a record for somebody who doesn't have a bond date. And that might be our business process. So the answer to this is absolutely driven by your business process and rules. If I were creating a list of individual invoices that we were sending out, I could enforce unique values. So each invoice number had to have a different number. But that is not true in this column. It's possible that a couple of organizations would have the same bond type. There are also some other options down below, like column validation to make sure that the data that's entered meets a particular rule or standard you have. And I trust you to check these items out later. For now, I have created my new column and gone through the basic choices that are involved, and now I'm going to click Save. And here's my new column. I'd also like to dump some columns from this view. I don't want them to appear even if they normally exist. For example, I don't really want to show attachments here. And one of my column settings is actually to decide to hide a column. I'm not removing it from SharePoint altogether. I'm just taking it away from this particular view. And the same thing is going to be true with home phone. I don't need to see it. We're going to go to our column settings, show hide columns, and we're going to choose to hide home phone. Having said that, I might have a column that I actually don't want. For example, in this contact list, they ask for a web page. And it might be that we just don't track that. Or we don't track country because all of the subcontractors are located in the same country where we're doing business. If I really want to eliminate a column, then what I need to do is go back to my settings, go into my list settings, choose the column that I want to dump here in the columns list. For example, let's imagine for a moment that I wanted to get rid of country region. I select it. I have the option to rename it, to add a description, to set the number of characters and so on, but I also have an option to delete this column. Note, if I do this, this column will be removed and all data in the column will be permanently deleted. It does not go to the recycle bin. It is gone. So we're only going to delete a column if we know that we're not going to need it in the future. For now, I will leave it here. And return to my customized list for subcontractors. I'm assuming that you know the basics of sorting, filtering, and creating views in SharePoint Online in a list or a library. So you already know that, for example, if I filter by solar panels and click Apply, and I have a list then of nothing but solar panels, that the All Items list has a notification on it, that small asterisk, that basically is telling me, you've modified this view. What would you like to do with it? And what I'd like to do then is create a new view, and I will call that solar panels only. Because I think other people will use this view, I will make it a public view. If I wasn't sure, I wouldn't do that because everyone can create their own views if they can do anything more than read a list. So if I've created a simple view and I'm not sure, I'll just hang on to it myself. So here's my new view of solar panels only. I can switch back and forth between that view and all items. But I want to show you some other things that you can do with all items or any other view that you create. For example, I'd like the items that are back ordered to stick out. I'd like to have a back ordered list. I'd also like to have an in-stock list. That would be nice. In the in-stock list, I'm simply going to filter out the back-ordered items. But here, I want to format this view so that items that are back-ordered give me a visual indicator. When the Format View pane opens, we can now apply either alternating row styles or conditional formatting. Or if you'd like to deal with some code, you can go into advanced mode and actually paste in some JSON script that would specify exactly how you wanted to have different items formatted. That's beyond the scope of this course. But if all I want to do is have something that looks, for example, like green bar paper, highlighting alternate rows so that, the user's eye can follow more easily across the screen. It applies gray to the odd rows by default, but I can say, no, I'd really like to have a green, maybe even a lighter green than that. Just something that makes it easy to look at. And that light green is really easy on the eyes. There's a reason you see that on the walls of hospital rooms all the time. So this is one possibility. I can also then reset it to the default for alternating rows. But there's an even cooler thing here, which is conditional formatting. And if you're used to conditional formatting in Excel, the result is going to be the same. The process is a little different. First, I'm going to choose not to have any fill on the regular rows. But I'd like to highlight the rows where the item that we're looking at is not in stock. It is actually back ordered. So I'm going to add a rule. I'm going to say check the availability column. And if the value in availability is equal to back ordered, make sure that you're typing this well. And by the way, it's helpful if that first field, availability, is a choice field. So somebody can't type back ordered wrong or put a space in it. They just make a selection from a drop-down list. And if that's the case, then I want to show that row in this light yellow, for example. That's a back ordered item. Pretty nice. The back ordered items jump right out. And when an item is no longer back ordered, when it's back in stock, then this rule won't apply, and so it won't be yellow any longer. So I'm going to save this. And with my changes saved, the panel stays open in case I would like to create additional rules, but I don't. This is the only conditional formatting rule I wanted to apply. Very nice. And easy to do. Remember that we're not affecting the data at all. There's nothing in this row to indicate it should be back ordered. This formatting is being applied at the view level. Libraries are a specialized type of list. Therefore, the formatting that we can do in a list applies as well in a library, but there are a couple of customizations that are library specific that are worth knowing about. I'm going to go to a site that has a library that has a few documents in it. And you can just open any library you wish, whether it has documents or not, to look at the features that I'm going to show you. Because I can change the settings of libraries so that business processes are enforced and it's easier for users to do their work. SharePoint has two features, versioning and content approval, that are used in libraries. Versioning is used when it's important to maintain a history of document changes, and content approval is generally used when document changes need to be approved before being released for use. Go to the library where you want to apply either versioning or content approval or both, and let's go to Settings and Library Settings. These settings are found under the General Settings, and you click the link for Versioning Settings. Content approval allows you to specify that users can upload documents, modify documents, but someone needs to approve them before they're available for site users who are neither owners or editors. Here's a business case where I've used content approval. A library houses a policy manual that has a small number of editors and many, many users. While those editors are working on editing the manual, we don't want users to be confused by seeing something that's only partially changed, half-baked, so to speak. By requiring content approval for submitted items, the documents that users see will remain as they were until the edits have been approved by someone in the approver role, that's an official permission role, in the library. The same goes for a brand new document. With content approval enabled, every document in the library must be approved before regular site users will see it. And to require content approval, you simply turn this on. I'm going to turn this back off. And you might have noted that when I turned it back off, it says, now that you're turning this off, if you had any items that were pending or had been rejected, there's no content approval any longer to filter those out of the view. So that's something you need to know if you were ever to switch this back. But normally once you've turned this on, you're going to leave it because you turned it on for a business reason. Next we have document version history. Document versioning is on by default in SharePoint Online, and by extension, document versions are also tracked in OneDrive for Business. When I create a new library, a major version is automatically created each time a document is modified. So if I create or upload a document, that's version 1. If I then edit that document, I have a version 2. And if I upload another version with the same name, that will become version 3. And in each case, that version 2 and version 3 is the current version at that time. Each of the versions are available, though, 1, 2, and 3. So while 3 is current, I can return to 1 or 2 if I wanted to roll back a set of edits, or if a user accidentally uploads a document with the same name as an existing document and it was an accident, they didn't mean to. By default, all you're creating is major versions, what I just described. If I have a document 1 that I just uploaded and I edit it, I have version 2 and version 3. This gets more interesting, though, when I tell SharePoint Online to create major and minor versions in this library, minor versions being drafts. Here's the business case. Let's go back to our policy library. As editors are working on a policy, each time they save it, it creates a draft, a minor version. So if we were editing version 3, the first set of edits would be 3.1, the second would be 3.2, 3.3, and those numbers will just keep chugging along. And at some point, the folks editing think they're done. And they ask an approver to then turn the last minor draft into a major version. In the example that's on your screen, working with 1.0, if 3 sets of edits had been done, so we have 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, an approver will then go in and change 1.3 to 2.0. They promote it from a draft to a major version. What are users in this site seeing? Well, the users in the site shouldn't see draft items, and we'll turn that off in a moment. Users will only see the versions that are major versions, and this, again, allows a group of editors to be modifying without changing the version that users see, but while keeping a version history of the edits that they are doing. If you wish to keep drafts for major versions, you can say keep drafts for a number of major versions. You can keep a specific number of major versions. You might change this to 100, for example, if you wish. And then here in draft item security, we get to the question of who can see the items that are drafts, that are minor versions. This is only enabled because we've turned on major and minor versions. By default, any site member, anyone who can read items, and even visitors in some sites, can see the draft items. So if you had an open governance process where you wanted people to be able to look at the proposed changes, that's what minor versions could be, then you would leave this. But in many libraries, like our policy library, we only want the editors to see the drafts. We want all of the other members, all of the regular users, to only see the major versions. The last question is, should people who are editing documents be required to check them out? And there's a link here so you can learn more about requiring checkout. What I'll tell you that is often a showstopper is that if a document is checked out, it's checked out for solo editing. That means that you can't simultaneously author or co-author documents. So if a number of editors were working on the same policy document, requiring checkouts would turn this into a serial process where one works and others wait until they finish. So this is turned off by default. However, you might have a business process where you have to be clear exactly who made a particular set of changes. And if so, you might then choose to require checkout. If this sounds like something you would need in a business process, this link is right here for you to learn more. If you understand your organization's processes around a set of documents, you can create a library that will enforce those business processes for you. Many of us work with the same documents in a library over and over again. They're documents that we created, documents that we're the last person who modified them, and I want to show you how to create a public view that all of the users of this library can use to filter these documents into a set of documents that are documents that you either created or modified. I'm going to create a new view, so let's go directly to the library settings. Scroll down to Views, create a view, and I'm going to create a standard view starting from all documents, and I'm going to call this My Documents. And I will make it as a public view. I can choose whatever columns I wish to display. In this case, I'm actually going to choose to include created date, which is created and created by, as well as the name of the document. And now I'm going to scroll down to the filter section, and I'm going to say, when the document was created by me, and you put this in brackets, If you type this before, it shows up here, but if not, open bracket, me, close bracket. Or if the document was modified by me, include it on the list. If neither of those are true, don't show it to me. That's all the changes I want to make. So I'm going to click OK. And I have my new My Documents view that works for everybody in our organization, because no matter who's logged in, they will only see documents that they have either created or modified in this library if they switch to the My Documents view. Let's switch back to All Documents. I want to show you another dynamic view that's useful, and that's a date-based dynamic view. I'm going to go back to the settings for my library again, drop down here, and I'm going to create a new view based on All Documents again. It's a good idea to modify all documents to include the columns you want to use most frequently, or create a view like that you can base other views off of. This is going to be last 3 days. And it's a public view. Now, when someone creates a document or uploads a document, the modified and modified by is set to the values of created and created by. So if no one's modified a document, there are still values in here. I don't necessarily need to include created and created by for this view, because what I want to do here is show the items where the column modified, which is a date, is greater than, this is the other variable that we can use, today, in brackets, -3. And I don't need to have anything else because, again, if I create a new document today, the modified date is set to the same as the created date. Let's click OK. And this is my new documents view. So if I want to be able to have users easily find the documents that have been modified or uploaded or created in the last 3 days, this is a great way to do it. A little simple math in the view. I find dynamic views to be relentlessly useful in SharePoint Online libraries. In a previous movie, we added a contact list to create a subcontractors app in the Win installation site. I want my mobile workforce to be able to quickly and easily connect to that list. So I'm going to create a PowerApp to do that. I'll go to Site Contents to find our list because we didn't add it to any navigation yet. Click on Subcontractors. And then in the toolbar at the top, choose Create an App under PowerApps. I'm going to enter the name of my app, which is going to be Subcontractors-Wind, because there might someday be a subcontractors app for solar as well. And click Create. And I'm going to be taken from SharePoint into the Microsoft PowerApps Studio. We'll wait a moment while PowerApps fires up and connects to our data. Notice at the top now it says Create an App in, and it has the site name. Be patient with this process. A lot is being built for us. I'm going to make this a little larger so you can see it. We get, by default, an application that has a browse screen. So here we have our 3 subcontractors that I entered. A detail screen, which lets us work with just one subcontractor, and an edit screen, which allows us to edit subcontractor information. So those are the screens that are created, a 3-screen application. You can theme this if you wish so it looks different than other applications. I'm going to choose, for example, the forest theme for our subcontractors. And I want to show you the functionality that we have already. This is set up for a cell phone. You can tell it's really in portrait mode. This is a phone form factor. It's not being built for a tablet or an iPad. And I'm going to preview this by clicking the button that looks like a play button. So if I'm using this app on my phone, I can click on a person, pull up their information. We don't have any home phone numbers. We're going to deal with that in a moment. And from here, I can choose to delete an item, or I can edit the item, and then I'm taken to the edit screen. And here we have even some extra things. For example, full name we don't want either. We know their last name and their first name. We're in good shape. When you're done previewing, you simply close it. So in just a matter of minutes, we have a functional app, but we can clean it up a little bit by cleaning up the different screens. The browse screen looks good. It has a sort button on it so that I can sort these in whatever order I wish. Right now, they're listed in the order that they are in the application. On the details screen, I don't want to include a home phone, so I'm simply going to click that home phone card and delete it. I also don't want a full name. I'm going to click here and delete it. And PowerApps just slides everything else up. I can also edit this and modify it so the first name and last name are next to each other, some other options that I have. And now I'm going to go to the edit screen and get rid of those same cards. A card is a combination of a label and a control. We want job title, but I don't want home phone. Let's preview our app again. That looks good. This is all cleaned up. And if I go back to our list, this screen looks good as well. And again, I have the ability to sort here, to reload, and so on. This is pretty slick. A mobile app created in a matter of minutes. At this point, I'm going to check this app with the app checker. It says there are some accessibility issues, and that's true. I'm missing accessible labels to items, but the app itself is functional. What I need to do if I want to be able to use it is I need to save it. So I'm going to choose File, and I'm going to leave a note about any versioning. So this is initial app, still needs to have accessibility improvements. And I'm going to save it. And it's being saved to PowerApps. Now I'm going to publish it. Publishing will make this version available to everyone who has used permissions. And I'm going to publish this version. And now if I wish to, I can click Share. And I can add someone else as a co-owner of the application. Perhaps I have a designer who will work on some of the remaining issues with me. And I actually do. That would be Reggie. And they are a co-owner. And then I can add other users as well. But I'm going to leave it right here for now until we have this app finalized. I've opened the PowerApps application on my mobile device. And here is the Subcontractors Wind Power App that we just created. Opening on my iPhone, connecting to SharePoint. And it works just as we designed it. I'm returning to the communication site we created previously so we can work with the Hero web part, which is used extensively in communication sites. The Hero web part is one large hotspot. You'll notice that even though there's a link here, no matter where I point, I'm going to fire that link, whether I click on the picture, the text, or any other part of this web part which spans the page. When you use the Showcase template, you get 3 Hero web parts stacked up, followed by an image gallery at the bottom. I'm going to click Edit to open the entire page for editing. Select the Hero web part. I needed to click twice, actually, to get this list of links to show, and I want this Edit Details button. This shows me 3 parts of the Hero web part: the link, the background image, and the options. Let's start with the link. This link goes to learn about communication sites, a particular document. I'm going to change this, and I have a choice to actually use a number of different things. I could send this to a particular page, like our documents. I could send this to a specific image, which would be our footer logo. I can choose from stock images and search stock images for wind. I might find some interesting web parts that I could use. I can also do a web search, and I'm going to search for wind power statistics. And I'll get some choices. This is global annual installed wind capacity, global wind energy growth, number of different choices. I typically like choosing from Wikipedia. And this is wind power statistics. I like this installed capacity though, so I'm going to select this and open it. And so now this link will go to that page on Wikipedia. Next, I'm going to click in the title. where it says make an impression, and I'm going to put wind power for the 21st century. And notice that the title's automatically changing on the fly. I have a spot to put in a description, and I'm not ready to do that yet, so I'm going to say needs a description. I have a spot for a background image, and if I choose auto select, it will look for an image for me, and the image that it chooses is actually the image from wind power for the 21st century, but I want to choose a different image. I'm going to click change, and I'm going to upload an image from the exercise files, and the image that I'm going to use for this is Wind Farm Stylized. That's one of our images. Looks good. Add image. It'll take a minute to upload. I'm going to provide some alternative text for folks who use screen readers, and my alternative text is stylized image of a wind farm. Looks good so far. Click the options pane to open it. Do I want to show a topic heading? Yes. The current topic heading is new. I'm going to choose trending. Show call to action link. That's what this is. If I turn it off, it's gone. But I'm going to drop in a call to action link, and my photo, it looks like, is finally uploading. There it is. And my link is learn more about wind power. This is my call to action text, and where do I want this link to go? And it will go to wherever I send it to. So this looks good. I've edited this hero web part, and I can click republish. So here's my image. If I click on my image, it takes me to capacity. Let me refresh this. And I have two more hero web parts that I could modify in similar ways. I can return later and edit to edit my description. And this is how we change the settings for a hero web part, which can be used in team sites and hub sites as well, but is primarily used in showcase communication sites. Below the hero web parts, we have an image gallery. Our choices here are image by image. So if I go to my gallery and I wanted to add or remove images, I click edit to add a new image. Click on the image gallery and click the add button. And I'm going to add a new image. This image is the Michigan Wind Farm, which is also in the exercise files folder. There it is. Add image. I can add another. And you'll also find an Arizona wind farm that you can add. These images aren't yet saved, so if I delete them, they are gone. If I want to remove the images of the furniture, I can simply click on each one and remove it. If I edit the details, I can title it, caption it, and provide alternate text, which is a good idea for all of the images that I include. I'm going to move this item to the right, and it tells us how to do that. If I click the button, I use Control and the right arrow to move it to the right, or the left arrow, or I simply drag and drop. So this image, I'm going to title Michigan Wind Farm. Image of a wind farm in Michigan as my alternative text. Caption, Michigan Wind Farm. That looks good. Those items are being saved, and I can likewise caption, title, and provide alternative text for my Arizona wind farm. When I'm done, and I'm going to republish my page, refresh it, scroll back down, and here is my image gallery. So when I click on the image, for my caption, I have a lot of room for text because it will just run across the bottom of the page. And in the gallery, I can click and move from item to item. So even though these are large thumbnails, you want to use images with a good enough resolution that when your users click on them, they don't get a pixelated image. I've returned to our Wind Installations team site so that you can see how we edit a team site as opposed to a communication site. You'll find that it is a little different and a lot the same. Let's talk about the part that's different first. I'm going to click Edit, and this page does not have 3 hero parts stacked on each other. It actually has sections. The first section spans everything from news down to the bottom of the page. So this section is like a row, and you can modify its layout. So if I click in a section, the very top button is Edit Section, and this is where I modify the layouts and background for the section. This section currently has 1/3 right as its layout, which is as if there were 3 tall cells in the section, but the first 2 were merged together. So this allows for wider content on the left and narrower on the right. If I had similar content in terms of its width in the left and right columns of this section, I might choose 2 column. I can also select for the entire section a background. So if I wanted to apply, for example, this soft version of the color that's used in our theme, I can do that. And that's kind of slick. If I like the changes that I've made to my layout, I can save them as a draft or republish if I'm ready. I can also choose to throw my changes away and discard them. I'm going to simply republish. And here's my slightly modified web page. When we used to create SharePoint sites, we would use most of the space on this home page to display information from the site's various lists and libraries. This documents web part that allows us to display our document library is a good example of that. The modern SharePoint experience is focused far less on list and library content and more on the things that are more important to your team, activity and news. At the top, news is the primary focus of a team site. News is so important that it's also rolled up to the hubs, it's on SharePoint Home, and it's a primary screen in the SharePoint web app. Activity displays content that has been created or accessed recently. And then on the right, we have whatever quick links we think are most important for use on our site. We can add more content by adding more web parts to this particular page. Let's open it again for editing. We simply need to click where we want to add a new web part, and I want to add a web part right here at the top of column 2 in the first section. There's a long list of available web parts, and you can use search to search them. It's good to get an overview of what's here. The featured web parts are for text, image, a file viewer, a link, to embed something or to provide some highlighted content, but you can bring in a map from Big Maps, information from Bitbucket, a countdown timer for something, a hero web part if you wish, highlights from Yammer. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom because I want to add a weather web part. I'm going to add my title. I'm going to title this Our Weather, and I'm going to add a weather location. I can do this with a zip code. I can do this by typing a city name. I'll get some help here. Detroit, Michigan. I can add a second weather location if I wish, and I wish. Los Angeles, California, where our headquarters is, and I'm done with this particular part. I'd also like to add something a little more stringent. I want to add a PowerApp, and to make space for that, I'm going to get rid of our document library here. I'm just going to hit delete, and it is gone. I'm going to keep the link list because I want to use it later. Now, don't worry about our documents. There's a link in Quick Launch to get to them, so they're still really available from the home page. A team site starts with a single home page, which you can quickly fill with content. To add a new page to a site, choose New and select Page. You have some choices about how the page will look. So if I am largely going to add web parts, and don't necessarily want a visualization across the top, I might choose blank. I can choose visual. And this allows me to place an image behind this, and we have a page title and a color block. And I have basic text. I'm going to choose blank because we know how to do our layout and everything else we would like to manage. And I'm going to choose create page. At the top we have name your page. And I'm going to name this media. This is the same template that's used when I create a news post. Therefore, it has my identifying information in it. If I want to take myself out, it's just gone and I don't need to have a name or an email address. If I save this as a draft, you'll notice that the placeholder for identity is not displayed. I can click on image and drop a different image in the top of this site if I wish. You know how to work with images. I can set a focal point for an image, a specific spot on the page. So let's go ahead and use one of our images. I'm going to go back to upload and let's return to that stylized wind farm and pick it up right here. And I'll add that. If I wish, while it's uploading, I can make some other changes to customize the title area of my page. I have some overlap here. If I'd like to have the image and title combined, I can do that. This overlap looks kind of neat. Plain, no image at all. Color block, if I want a large image at the top. And when I have an image, I can set the focal point so that I'm actually using that to move the image up and down, centering it. I can align my title left or center. I tend to prefer left. I can place other text above the title. We've seen this before. We know how that looks. And if you don't have any text, you won't be showing a text block above the title. If you'd like to show the date it was published, just turn this on. And provide alternative text for any images. This is a stylized image of a wind farm. That looks good. Continue to save this as a draft. That's what it looks like. Pretty sharp. We're going to be adding web parts to this page. If I wish, while I'm in edit mode, I can add a section. Here, you know about the section layouts. So when you see plus signs over here on the left, you can add sections. So if I wanted, for example, 2 columns in a section, I can drop those in right now. And again, I don't necessarily want this page to be broadly available, so I'm simply going to save it as a draft right now. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the Power App that we created right back here so that it can be used directly from this page as well as in a mobile app. So I'm scrolling down and it's listed under M for Microsoft, not P for Power App. And I click and I'm going to include a custom business app in my page. It wants to know where my Power App lives, and it has the start of a link, but I have to figure out the rest of it. That's okay. We can do that. We're going to go to web.powerapps.com, which is where we went when we created our Power App. We didn't need to know how to get there because we went from our SharePoint list, but this is going to take us to the right place. I'm going to click on Apps, and this is the application I want to use. Do not copy the URL in the browser here. We need to get more information. We're going to go to the details for this app, and this is the web link that fires it up. Right-click on it, copy the link. Go back and paste it. And just give it a second. SharePoint is connecting back to PowerApps, which is connected to our SharePoint data. And here comes our application. If you'd like to border around it, you can turn that on. Just give you a box border. And by the way, that splash screen that comes in is a light blue screen. Since we're going to use this in our site that has the green color, it would be good to change the color of that splash screen, and that's something we can do in PowerApps. This is a preview web part. It may change over time. And I might like to have this web part higher up on the page, right under weather, for example. All I need to do is drag and drop to move it there and move the quick links further down the page. I'm going to click Republish. Each time we open this page, all of the web parts will load. It's asking me to sign in to start using PowerApps. It won't ask me that every time. And it might not ask you at all. But there we go. So now, rather than needing to go to the subcontractors list that we created, that functionality is available right here. Turns out we didn't need to put it on the quick launch. I want to add a video from Microsoft Stream to this site right here. So I'm going to click the plus to add a new web part. And there's Microsoft Stream. Note, you could also add videos from YouTube if you wish. But I'm going to choose Stream. Give it a second. And my source is actually going to be a single video. I need to go get its URL. So I'm going to go to Microsoft Stream, which opens in a new tab in my browser. I'm going to log in. You may or may not be prompted to do that as I was. And this will take me to my Microsoft Stream page for my organization. And there's a PSA here that I'd like to add. This is cool. And I want to look for the PSA. And this is just short version, the second one which I wish to include. So, what do I need to know about this? So I can open the video. We have one link here. I can also go to share. And this is my direct link to the video that does not include, for example, is in admin mode. So I'm going to copy this. And you'll want to note that with content like this, whatever permissions are on this video in Microsoft Stream, those same permissions are in place in SharePoint. Just because we're using SharePoint to get to Stream doesn't mean that we get to view videos that we don't have permission to see. It's a good thing to remember when you're posting one of your videos, because you need to make sure that your permissions in Stream are sufficiently broad to allow everyone who would visit your site in SharePoint to see the video. We've copied the link. We're in good shape. Come back. Control V to paste that address. There are a couple of options here. If I wish, I could start it at a particular point in the video, but it's a short PSA and I'd like to show the whole thing. I'm going to save this as a draft again. My page is loading and Stream is loading. So here's the top of my page, and here's my video that I can click here and play directly from Microsoft Stream. Microsoft Stream is included with Microsoft 365. So if someone has Microsoft Word and Excel, they also have access to Microsoft Stream typically. We're going to add a report from Power BI now to this page. This is a little more complex because you need to know that your users actually have licenses for Power BI to be able to view the content you're going to put here. So with this video, this PSA, we were really only worried about permissions that were set in Microsoft Stream. With our next web part that we're going to add, we're worried about permissions in Stream and licensing as well. If you have questions about this, talk to your IT department. I'm going to add a new section that's a one-column section, so I have lots of space for this. And I'm going to drop in a Power BI web part. And unlike Microsoft PowerApps, another part of the Power Platform, Power BI is listed under P for Power, not M for Microsoft. So we'll drop this in, and this is going to feel very similar to what we did with Stream. As a matter of fact, all of the web parts that you add are going to be added in a similar way. I want to add a report, and it's going to ask me where that report is. I've already fired up Power BI, and what I want to share is the Human Resources Employee Counts report. So I'm going to open it just so I can see it. I'm going to click Share, and I'm going to embed the report in SharePoint Online. So I'm going to click, and that will give me the link that I need. I'm going to select and copy it, Control C, and return here to SharePoint. Control V to paste. This is not the same as the URL that appears at the top of the page, so you'll want to follow these steps. to open it and choose Share Embed Report SharePoint Online. I can choose a particular page out of the report if it's a multi-page report. This is a single-page report. And I can choose its resolution. It's a 16 by 9, which most are. I have a navigation pane that I can display. I can show a filter pane if I wish. That will appear on the right-hand side. It's the same filter pane that I can display here in Power BI. But if I don't want to show a filter pane, I don't need to. If there's no place for folks to navigate to, I can turn off my navigation as well. That has the benefit in a one-page report of dropping out my page tab at the bottom because there's no need to navigate between pages. And I think I'm set. Let me close this. Now as the data that this report is constructed from changes, it will change in Power BI and it will change here as well. I'm going to save this as a draft again, but this is a good start to a page that has some media and some analysis for use by my colleagues. There's really only one thing I'd still like to do, which is I want to select this page, Control C, return to the home page on my site, throw it into edit mode because I do have a links list, we're just not seeing it. And that's because it has no links in it. I simply want to add a link from a link, paste this in, click open. The title for this is going to be Media and Analysis Page. It will select a thumbnail for me. I can put in a custom image if I wish. Auto-select it as SharePoint because it's a SharePoint site. SharePoint icon. I can add a description if I wish. This looks good. And I'm done. So here in my quick links, I have a media and analysis page with a SharePoint icon. I'm going to delete the other two links. And I'm going to drag this quick links part to the top, even above weather. So now my users have a way to easily get to this page and other pages I might create later. Let's republish. There's our link that takes us to a media analysis page with our video and our Power BI web parts. If your organization uses SharePoint and Microsoft Teams, particularly if you're just beginning to use SharePoint, you might want to know how you can empower your team and add chat to your experience simply by creating a team for the folks in this team site. There's a link in the lower left-hand corner that does that. If I click Create a Team, SharePoint will fire up Teams and create a team for wind installations. It doesn't take long. It's here already. It says Success. Click here to go to your team. So I'm going to click in SharePoint to go to my new team in Microsoft Teams. I have a document library in SharePoint. It will actually connect to Microsoft Teams. If you were to create a new team in Teams, you would automatically get a SharePoint site. So this tool is most appropriate for legacy work. For the existing SharePoint site that you have, where you'd like to add a team, or what Microsoft refers to as teamifying your SharePoint experience. So here we go, wind installations. It has a general channel. And so who are the members of this team? If I choose Manage Team, these are the two members who are currently in our wind installations SharePoint site. Myself and Reggie and, as you might recall, Robert Molina. If I add more users to the SharePoint site, they'll automatically be added to Teams. If I add more members to Teams, they're automatically going to be members of our SharePoint site. So this team site and this wind installations team in Microsoft Teams and our wind installations SharePoint site are now synchronized to work together. This is a great addition for SharePoint because it provides additional collaboration tools that are available in Microsoft Teams, an add-on to our existing capacity that we have in SharePoint. Now that I've teamified my SharePoint team site, I can add other content from SharePoint here directly in Teams. This is not duplicate data. This is just another contact point for that same information. And you do this in a channel. So I'm going to go to my general channel, which everyone in the Win Installations team or Win Installations Microsoft 365 group, depending on whether we're in Teams or SharePoint, has access to. I'm going to hit the plus to add a tab, and I'm going to click SharePoint, and I'm going to click SharePoint. And from here, I can add either pages or I can add lists, and I'm going to add our installation issue tracker that we created previously. If I want to add a page or list from a site that is not Win Installations, I can use this link. But these are my pages and my lists that we've created. So I'm going to choose my installation issue tracker, click Save, and Teams will set up a tab and retrieve that list from SharePoint. Now if I'm working in Teams, I have access to this list. I can also add entire pages. So let's go back to SharePoint. And this is our home page, and this is our news page. So if we wanted to display our news, we could click right here, click Save, and SharePoint will load our news feed from our SharePoint site. There's nothing to show here, and we shouldn't be shocked because our page thus far has no news, but I'm going to add a news story. Just a simple story. And I'm going to call it Test News Story and post it. Here we are in SharePoint. Let's go to Microsoft Teams. Switch back to posts. Load the news page again. And here's our news from SharePoint. It's equally easy to add a SharePoint document library to Teams. Simply click the plus, and in this case, choose Document Library with the SharePoint logo on it. We have choices to copy a link from somewhere else in SharePoint if the choice I want isn't here, but the choice I want is I'd like to link the document library from Win Installations, our team site, to Microsoft Teams. In Win Installations, the only document library I have is Documents. The general channel will get a post about this, so I don't have to email my colleagues and let them know. And I'm simply going to name this Document Library, although if I had multiple libraries in Win Installations, I should make sure I have a more descriptive name. Here we go. So, what documents do I have in my Documents library in SharePoint? My Documents library here is actually empty. So what's this general folder for? Well, this is kind of slick. Because Microsoft Teams has a general channel in Win Installations, automatically there is a general folder created here in the SharePoint library. If I add other channels under Win Installations in Teams, as we continue to do our work and perhaps add specific channels for different types of installations or different installation groups, this allows us to keep each channel's documents separate, not just here, but also here in SharePoint. A workflow is a process that proceeds through a sequence of activities until it reaches completion. Here's a simple example. I'm requesting time off for a vacation, so I begin by filling out my vacation request form, which I hand or email to my supervisor. My supervisor has the ability to either approve or reject the request, but assuming they approve it, they then send it to the Human Resources Department. And HR validates the request by making sure that I have enough days to cover the length of vacation I've requested. Assuming I do, I receive an email that says, "Hey, have a great vacation." It may be that some people, perhaps exempt employees, have a couple of other steps in here. Perhaps after the supervisor approves of the request, the vice president then has to approve the request. And then it goes to HR, I get email, and I get to go on vacation, or not. Workflows like this one are common in mid-sized and large organizations, and even small organizations have workflows. Time off and vacation requests, reimbursement requests, employee onboarding, travel requests, requests for business cards, computers, vehicles. I could easily add another 20 items to this list, and I'm sure you can as well. Think about any form you've ever filled out, then went to the next person, and it's probably a workflow. We often think we're in pretty good shape if we've simply replaced a paper form with something that we can email to each other. But even with an email-based process, workflow participants have extra duties. They have to keep track of where every item in the workflow is, whose inbox it's in now in case I show up to ask, hey, whatever happened to my vacation request? When we create a workflow in SharePoint, we're putting SharePoint in charge of our workflow, which allows our users to continue doing their creative work, which requires a human, while computers do what computers do best, being constantly vigilant in monitoring a process. The tool of choice for SharePoint workflows is PowerAutomate, formerly called Microsoft Flow. PowerAutomate is the workflow application in the Microsoft Power Platform, which also includes two tools we've already seen in this course, PowerApps and Power BI. SharePoint lists and libraries like this one are set up to use PowerAutomate. Simply click Automate, choose PowerAutomate, and you can create a flow right from here. And PowerAutomate is not limited only to SharePoint. We can use PowerAutomate to create workflows or flows that work not just in SharePoint, but with other Microsoft apps we use every day, like Excel and Outlook, Microsoft Teams and Dynamics 365. As well as other cloud-based software like Azure, SQL Server, MailChimp, Salesforce, and even Facebook. Let's create a new flow for our document library. To create a flow for a library as a whole, we don't begin by selecting a document or a folder. We begin with nothing selected. And then we'll click the More button, Automate, PowerAutomate, Create a Flow. The Create a Flow pane opens, and it will display flow templates that work for SharePoint. Here are some flow choices. The first one is the one we're actually going to create to send a customized email when a new file is added. There are many use cases for this flow. For example, if you're a project manager, you might want to add this flow to a deliverables library so you know when your team has finished deliverables. Next, request manager approval for the selected item. This is similar to a flow that we referenced earlier, which was to request a sign-off. In this case, though, we're actually asking for an approval. Request that same type of approval is in Teams. Save my email attachments to a SharePoint document library. Post a message to Teams for a selected file. Click Show More to see copy files between OneDrive and SharePoint, add an Outlook task, and so on. These are all SharePoint templates, and this list continues to grow because there are new flow templates added to the list. But I want to create a flow that will send a customized email whenever a new file is added to the Win Installations document library, so that's the template that I will select. And we are now leaving SharePoint and dropping into PowerAutomate, and you may be prompted to select your account or to log in. And here we are in PowerAutomate, flow.microsoft.com. This is the high-level overview of what's going to happen with this particular template. It shows me it's going from SharePoint to Outlook and Office. It has a description, and then below it says this flow will connect to Outlook, SharePoint, and Office 365 users. It will use my account and it just checked to make sure that those are all valid connections. If there's a red X here instead of a green check mark, then you click the button next to the red X and you make sure you've selected the proper account, or perhaps you need to create a new connection. Before we leave this screen, I want to point out that PowerApps and flows are always created in a specific environment, and the default environment is used by default. If you have multiple environments in your organization, or if you're working, for example, in a test environment, then you'll want to talk with your Power Platform admin about which environments you should use. But normally, you'll use your default environment. I'm going to click the Create Flow button to create the flow using this template with the specified connections. I want to edit this flow just to change its name. And I'm going to say Send a customized email when a document is added to Wind Installations Doc Library. Because I'm using this flow in more than one library, so I want to make sure if I have an issue with it, I can get back to the appropriate flow. That's really all I want to change. There are other things here I could change, and you can learn more about that in one of the courses on Power Automate that we'll talk about at the end of the course. But I'm done. We're saved. And I'm going to return to Wind Installations, and I'm going to upload a document. The document I want to upload is in the exercise files, but you can upload any document you wish. Uploading one item to Documents. And it says it's now available, and I can see it here in the library. Now, I'm going to quickly go to Outlook. And note at the top of my inbox, Ginny Von Quarter added a new file, Kinetico logos with hexadecimal values.pdf. Thanks. And this even includes a link, so I can go directly to that file in SharePoint if I wish. So we've created a flow. We've executed the flow so that we know that it works. And we will return to Microsoft SharePoint. In SharePoint Online, permissions are used to enforce security. First, an overview. You can only view things that you have permission to view. For example, if there is a site that I am not invited to see, it's a private site, and I have no permissions to view it, no content from that site will show up in my search results. There are 6 built-in SharePoint permission levels. 3 of them are used with built-in groups that are used by default on team sites. We have site owners that use the full control permission level, site members, and that group is created and assigned to the edit permission level, and site visitors assigned the read permission level. The actual groups created will have the site name first. So in our Wind installation site, it would be Wind Installations Site Owners, Wind Installations Site Members, and so on. Let's drill down in each of these just a little bit. Site visitors can view the contents of the site, and they can download documents from the site. Site members can do those things, but they also can add, edit, and delete content in document libraries, in web parts, in apps. They can also create new lists, and they can share the site with others. Site owners have all the permissions of visitors and members, but they also have the administrative load. They're the managers for the site. They can add web parts, as we've been doing. They can set site security, as we will be doing. And they can ultimately even delete the site. Group members can include individuals, but they can also include Microsoft 365 groups. So if I'm setting up a new site and there's an existing Microsoft 365 group where every one of its members should be included in the site, I can just add the group. New folks who are added to that group then will automatically become members of the site. Will automatically be added to the security site for the group. I can add Microsoft 365 security groups and mail-enabled security groups. There are 3 other permission levels that are built into SharePoint that aren't used all the time. Design, which is somewhere between full control and edit. Designers can customize the site, they can add web parts, but they can't delete the site and they can't set permissions. Contribute is between edit and read. Contributors can add, edit, and delete list items. They can put documents in libraries or delete them, but they're not allowed to add new lists or libraries to the site. And finally, view is a stripped-down version of the read permission level. Viewers can view, but they can't download documents from the site. If you needed a particular set of permission levels, if the set you wanted was not here, you can create a custom permission level. Make sure first that you need it, because every new thing you add that needs management and administration increases the administrative workload. But I'll give you an example of a permission level I've created, which was a permission level between read and contribute, where someone could add and edit list items, but they were not allowed to delete list items. There are legitimate business requirements for which the only answer is another permission level. But make sure you've exhausted the use of permission levels that already exist before you create new ones. In SharePoint Online, permissions are for the site and all the contents in the site. This is the ideal. In other words, if I'm going to create permissions for the wind installation site, I'm not going to then create separate permissions for individual lists, libraries, or individual documents. As with permission levels, there are business requirements that may drive me to create unique permissions for a particular document library, for example. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But the less of that you can do, the easier the site is to administer for yourself and for others. And the easier it is for members and visitors to understand their permissions. So there are 3 things I'm going to show you how to do in the next 3 movies. First, if you need a new group on your site, how would you create that group using an existing set of permission levels? Second, if you have a business reason to have unique permissions for a library or for a folder, how do you set those unique permissions? And we will do that with a document library. And then finally, we haven't talked about sharing, but members are allowed to share the site with others, share documents broadly. But you may have a site where it's appropriate to limit the sharing, and we'll do that with something called an access request. I want to create a new group in SharePoint Online so that someone can view the content on the site, but they can't download anything. And that permission level already exists. It's called View. Let me show you how we're going to create a new group for use on this site. We're going to click Settings and then go to Site Permissions. Note we have Invite People, Site Owners, Site Members, and then I'm going to go to Advanced Permission Settings to open up the Permissions page. On the Permissions tab here, I'm going to click Create Group, and the name is going to be Site Viewers. About Site Viewers, View Only, no download. You have to have an owner for this security group, so it automatically dropped me in, which is fine. In the Group Settings section, we want to specify who can view who's in this group. I'm going to say group members can see the other members in the group, and the group owner, that would be me, can edit the membership of the group. In other words, add people. If I wanted other people to be able to add folks who could view and not download, for example, the group members, I could click this. I'm not going to. In the membership request section, you can allow people to request access to the site. If they tried to go to the site rather than simply being turned away, they would be told you can request permission at this point. We don't need to do that for this site, but if I did, I would also have the choice of whether I want to automatically accept their requests. Now, let's choose the permission level, and the permission level is Restricted View. Can view pages, list items, and documents. Documents can be viewed in the browser, but not downloaded. And I'm going to click Create so that I have this new group available for my use. And here are my site viewers. Now, it would have been best if I had named this Wind Installations Site Viewers. That would have been more in keeping with what we have. So let's go back to our list of groups and refresh this. And I can edit this. So it would have been better if I had named it in a way that was in keeping with the existing groups. So I'm going to select, choose my group settings, and change the name to Wind Installations Viewers. That's all I want to change. Click OK to save that change. Perfect. If I wish, then I can add people to my groups right here. I can email users, remove users, or I can add new users to this group. So I'm going to add Sally Kerner and Charles Woodwick. They can view the contents of the site, but they can't download it. If I wish, I can include a personal message here for Sally and Charles about why I am adding them to this particular group. But here they are. So these are my Wind Installations members. I have no visitors. and I have viewers. This is how you create a new group and add users to it directly in SharePoint Online. I'm going to add an app to my site. I need a document library that's going to be used for budgets and proposals. I don't want everyone on the site to be able to use this document library. Only the site owners should have access to this particular library. And so I'm going to set unique security for this library. This is a real business use case. And if you need to do this, my advice is either to set up a separate library or to set up a specific folder for those documents or files that you want to isolate and have more restrictive security on. Don't be dragged into the habit of setting unique permissions for an individual document. Set it either at the site level, which is the default, or if you must, at the document library or folder level. I'm going to drop into that library right here. This is the library I want to set unique permissions on. And let's go to its settings button, and let's go to the settings for the library. We're not setting site permissions, we're setting library permissions. In the right-hand column, permissions for this document library. By the way, these same settings exist for lists as well. And it tells us that our permissions are being inherited, and they're inherited in this case from the site as a whole. So the first thing we need to do is we need to stop inheriting permissions. We are about to create unique permissions for this document library. Changes we make to permissions in the site as a whole will no longer affect this document library, and say OK. And that message box is the reason that our administrative load gets more difficult when we do this. We now have this library has unique permissions, which is exactly what we want. And so what I'd like to say is in this library, the members have no permission. Going to remove that group. And viewers and visitors alike have no permissions. Only Wind installation owners have permissions to this particular document library. Remember, we're not changing the site as a whole, only this library. And in the same way, if we suddenly had a group of people who were, for example, auditing our proposals, we could create a separate group for them. I wouldn't add them to our owners because then they have full control of the site. But we could create yet another group that we would add to this library's list of groups that have permissions to this particular document library within Win installations. When we're all done, simply return to your SharePoint site. And if I wished, I could at this point include that library here in the navigation because only site owners will see that navigational link. By default in SharePoint Online, any site member can add new members as easily as I can. They simply click the link and they add members. And if they're looking at a document library, and if they want to share a file, the share button is right here. Very easy. You may have a need to limit the amount of sharing that happens within a specific site. And if you do, I want you to know how best to do that. So if I wanted to limit sharing here in Win installations, I'd click the gear and I'd go to my site permissions. The permissions pane flies out, and at the bottom there's a link for advanced site permissions. And this is about site sharing. So I'm going to click that link, and this will take me to the permissions page where we created our viewers group. In the Manage Group on the Permissions tab, click Access Request Settings. And what we're seeing here are the SharePoint team site defaults. Individual members are allowed to share the site and individual files and folders. They're allowed to invite others to the site members group when installation members. And this has to be enabled to allow them to share the site. So if this is turned off, then all they can do is share individual files and folders. If I don't want users to be able to decide whether or not to share, then I'm simply going to turn these checkboxes off. Now sharing is no longer enabled. And if I turn off access requests, then only the site owners will be able to add new users to the site. However, I could allow access requests and say, if someone requests access to the site, then I can say send this request to myself, I'm the site owner, or I could say simply send it to the admins for wind installations. If users then try to gain access or to share, and they want to know who they could talk to, I could say sharing from this site has been limited. For more information, contact the site owner. So users who end up on the access request page because they try to access the site will receive this message. I show you this for use in the rare cases where you don't want your users to be able to share, perhaps for a period of time or perhaps for the long term. By turning off allow members to share the site and to invite others to the group, you've increased your administrative workload. Therefore, if your problem is a small number of users who are oversharing, you might better address this by training or conversation with those users rather than modifying the site sharing for everyone. Again, your decision, but the tool is here for your use. I'm going to return this to the defaults and click OK, and we're back in permissions, and from here back to our wind installation site.